my structure here for you guys, so welcome. My name is Spilo. The goal here is we're going to give you guys, I would say brief, but knowing me, it's not going to be brief, a relatively in-depth discussion on team coaching fundamentals, things that I look for, basically the system and structure with which I approach things, being as specific as I can without necessarily filling in all the details, because that's obviously subjective to your situation. Then we're going to talk about how I would handle team reviews and team coaching as a whole. Preferably, I think Malevolence, we're going to have a couple of codes here to where I can actually go over some stuff in game and then talk about how I would handle that from a review perspective. And then obviously at the end, we'll have some time for some questions and answers about literally anything. So we will be talking briefly, occasionally, about macro strategy and so on. But for the most part today, we're not going to be talking as much about how to position, how to layer, how to push, how to pull. That kind of stuff we talked about in depth with our, I think we already did a macro seminar with y'all. But for the most part, we're going to be focusing on the leadership aspects, the structure aspects, the mindset aspects. And I'm going to go ahead and plug this really quick now. But if you want more information on this, maybe a little bit more in depth, let me pull this up really quick here. I did a National Association for esports coaches and directors. I was asked to do, so this is like the collegiate high school or Overwatch organization. They asked me to do their Overwatch seminar a few years back. And that's the full seminar. I linked it there for any of you guys that want a more in-depth discussion on this in person. It goes a little bit more in depth. And also I have Coach Askoff. You guys might remember Coach Askoff from the Vancouver Titans. I think Askoff, Chris, probably the best Western coaches of all time, in my opinion. And Askoff goes in detail onto how to build a team environment. And so I think that's a great seminar. It goes maybe in more depth than I will here today. But yeah. Okay, let's do this. So official introduction, my name is Spilo. I've been coaching professionally for almost 8 years, I'd say, basically being paid. Coaching teams since around 2019. I've coached all the way down to literal platinum teams, bronze teams. Coached my way up through tier 3, all the way up through tier 2, contenders, all the way into the Overwatch League. I've been a head coach for very successful teams within both the tier 2 scene and the tier 3 scene, and then been both the macro strategy individual coach at the tier 1 scene. And we're going to talk about not just the fundamentals of how to communicate and how to lead, but also basically how to build a team environment. And so I'm going to start sharing my screen here, if you guys can see that, and we're just going to kind of use this as a backdrop here. So we're going to use an acronym here, which is going to be basically just simplifying the process as much as you possibly can. Obviously, as you guys can see, I have a wonderful drawing pad, and I'm definitely not using my mouse because you can tell the calligraphy, the penmanship is beautiful. So left, an acronym. Okay, bear with me. Level is the first one. And what essentially level is it's setting your expectations based off of what your team can accomplish. One of the big challenges that I have run into when I worked with teams early on is I'm a very intense person. So I'd come flying into these masters teams, these diamond teams early on in my career, and we're winning the freaking Overwatch League. We're all going to be GM1 players. We're going to pop off. We're going to kill everybody. But the reality is that I was working with players that would scrim once a week, were content to play ranked once or twice a week, and had absolutely zero aspirations. They were all low rank, or they just didn't really want to get better. They weren't really serious about committing. And you're going to notice that a lot of teams will have a mixture of that. And I also work with high school teams where there's 2 GM players and 1 random bronze support player stuck on Mercy. So the first thing that you need to kind of consider when you're working with a team is, what is this team's level? Not just the level of performance, but also their level of trust and buy-in. The reason why that's important is because that is what sets the next thing, which is our expectations. So our expectations are, what do I actually expect from this team in terms of performance? What do I expect from this team in terms of progress? What do I expect from this team in terms of buy-in? We're going to be going in much more in depth on each of these in just a minute, but for right now, bear with me. So the level of the team at that point in time, the level of trust that they have in me, the level of performance that they can put on at this exact moment is what directly leads to expectations. What can I expect from this team? If you're working with a high school team, if you're working with a collegiate team, if you're working with a master's team, if you're working with a team that has aspirations to win Face-It League, to win Masters League, then your expectations, your level are going to change depending on that. Now, those things are not set in stone. We'll come back to that one later. Expectations leads to feedback. And what this essentially means is this is where the juice gets cooking. This is where your leadership, your coaching, your feedback, your ability to integrate players into the system, their individual expectations, your entire team culture is based off of the feedback that you're giving the players and the feedback that the players are giving you. But you don't know what kind of feedback that you're getting or what you're expecting from your team until you know what your expectations for the team are reasonably going to be. And you don't know what those expectations are reasonably going to be unless you know what level you're starting with. And then this leads us to the final one, which is training. And this is where we finally wrap this horrific acronym up, because feedback needs to be followed with how do we actually apply this? How do we actually apply all the information, all the feedback that we've given in? This applies to both scrimmage effort. This applies to team meetings. This applies to individual review. This applies to team review, the whole 9 yards. But the reason that we start with level is that your type of training, your quality, intensity, effort, frequency of training, none of this matters without level. Let me tell you guys a quick anecdote here. So when I first got into team coaching, I worked with a high masters team, one of the first teams I worked with. And during the several months that I worked there, these guys were semi-competitive. We never won the Overwatch League. We never won Open Division, which was the tournament system at the time. But what we did do is we increased our level, we increased our expectations, we leveled up our feedback, we leveled up our training to the point to where we had masters players literally beating 4.4K teams about 50% of the time. Now, this is not the inflated 4.4K crap that we deal with today where somebody peaked 4.4K in 2016. We were actively way overperforming expectations due to our performance, but that took time. We leveled up slowly over time. Now, I make that jump here. The reason why I'm saying this is not just to pat myself in the back, but to say that the next team that I moved on to from there, because I wanted to level up my performance, is I wanted to work with a more serious team. So I trialed with a bunch of tier 3 teams. A lot of them were breaking into contenders. I ended up settling with Chicken Contendies. Now, Chicken Contendies from a performance level had a lot of expectations and had a very high level performance. This team was basically a shoe-in for contenders at this point in time. They were going to win the tournament or going to finish top 2, top 3, 100%. But the thing that I failed with the level check, and this is why we're going to kind of delve more in detail on these two things, is the level check here as we're going to do this here. The thing that I failed with Chicken Contendies is I didn't evaluate the level of trust that I had. So what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about 2 levels, okay? One, the performance of the individual and the team, like what this team is capable of right now, but also the level of trust. Now, the reason why I put this as such a priority, and I don't think a lot of people are going to talk about this, is because it was the thing that honestly completely blindsided me. So we'll say performance, because everyone understands performance, but not everybody understands trust. So my little anecdote here is that I trialed for the team. They liked some of the feedback I gave during the scrim. Joined the team. Team culture was a little bit toxic. Definitely had some alphas in the team that kind of demanded everything kind of revolve around them, and they were not used to working with a coach. In addition to that, they didn't know me from Adam. I did not have a Liquipedia at that point in time. This was my first official team to work with. I had only worked with them for a week or so, and I kind of went in there expecting to mediate some difficult roster decisions. Let's put it that way. Like I kind of decided, like, okay, I think we had a couple of tough decisions about who's playing where or who's playing there, or what decisions or what compositions we're running. And the reality is the team did not want to hear my feedback on that. I needed to not overplay my hand, and based off of the team's level of trust, based off of performance, go from that. And what I did is I pushed too hard. And what ended up happening is it wasn't really my fault. The team was kind of self-imploding at the time, regardless of what I did. But I got really, really frustrated that I'm the coach, guys. Why aren't we listening to me? This isn't going to work. Nobody told me that when you're signing up for a lot of these teams, you're just a glorified assistant or a glorified volunteer. If you haven't been with a team for a long point in time, you're not going to have that level of trust. Now, at the Overwatch League level, You might think that this is a lot easier, and you would be right. Obviously, when you're working for a paid position, you're expected, you've signed on the players, maybe you've built the team, you have a lot more agency. But if you ask Chris, and honestly, a lot of even other more strict teams, there still is a limit about how much you can throw your weight around depending on the team. You have to earn the trust. So the first thing that you have to do when you go into the team is you have to know the level of trust that the players have in you, and then gauge the amount of feedback, the amount of leadership, the amount of ownership that you take of the situation based off of that. The reason that I don't have this problem as much nowadays is because people pay $5 trillion, get a team VOD review, and because they've paid me $5 trillion, I don't go in there and be like, well, guys, they obviously want my opinion. They're paying me so I can throw my weight around. But if you're signing up as a volunteer coach and going in guns blazing, you're going to have a really bad time. So play it slow, offer feedback, develop a camaraderie and trust with the players, know your limitations as a coach in terms of your leadership and ability to make decisions, involve players in those decisions. And then over time, hopefully you're going to be able to build more and more trust and be able to make more and more important decisions. A good example of this is I got a lot better at this. By the time I was with Sheer Cold, I worked with that team a lot. And even though that was also relatively a volunteer position, we were not an organization, nobody was being paid, I was able to make a lot more important roster decisions, compositional decisions, because I'd been working with the team, I had earned the trust, I had the pedigree, they knew my competence, and so I was able to make more and more important decisions, even though it was still a volunteer position. So I know this is a kind of an uncomfortable thing. We want all the juicy, feel good, you're going to be a leader, inspiring leader, but the reality is that you are not being paid a lot of the time, they're not being paid a lot of the time. You have to know your limits as a coach, and that might take time. You could be literally the best leader in the world, like the most wise, wonderful, charismatic, knowledgeable person in the history of the world. Sign on for a tier 3 team, and those 17-year-old jackasses will not take your feedback if they don't trust you right off the bat. And there's nothing that you're doing wrong. Absolutely nothing you're doing wrong. You just have to play your cards right and be patient. You have to play cards right and be patient. That's actually good feedback for players too. Okay. Does that make sense? I'm going to go ahead and swap over to, I actually would like to do some questions as we move along, just before we kind of completely abandon that topic. This is this is the uncomfortable crap. This is like the player management. You got to be really careful with this stuff. I'll give it about 60 seconds and then we'll move on to expectations. Because this single-handedly, as good of a coach as you can be, this can completely sabotage your entire run. So with trust, how do you go about building that? It's a great question. I think it's like one of those questions of like, how are you a reliable employee at your job? You know, that it's as simple as that. Show up, do what the team expects of you, right? Whether that's leading VOD reviews, asking questions, giving goals, giving feedback, working with players one-on-one, having conversations, showing up on time. Players come up with a set of expectations for the team. You always hurdle those. You always match those expectations. You need to be the most reliable person on that entire team with what that team is expected to do. Let's put it this way. When I worked with London Spitfires season 1, right? I had never worked in the Overwatch League before. I earned their trust quickly because I jumped into one-on-one reviews frequently with them all the time, asked their feedback, asked what they wanted to accomplish, gave them honest criticisms, but I didn't just tell them, hey, shut up, this is stupid, this is what you're doing wrong. I had to earn that trust by not only knowing my crap about the game, but also being a good communicator and asking questions and making sure that those conversations happen naturally. When did you know you would gain the team's trust? There's no line. Don't ask yourself, when did you know you gained the team's trust? It's like, am I continuing to gain more and more trust? How do you know when you're strong? How do you know when you're good at Overwatch? There is no line in the sand. You just continue to gain more and more and more trust. And then based off of that line, based off of that responsibility, you're able to make more and more decisions for the team. When did they start to listen? Sure. Like for me, the easiest way to gain trust off the bat is to focus on the strategy and the feedback first, right? That's why I've always been, I think that like the whole dad coach mindset is great, but that can be a very difficult thing to start with. You need to know your crap about Overwatch first. You earn their trust. Okay, this guy knows his crap about Overwatch. Wait, this guy is consistently talking with me and asking questions and soothing problems out and managing expectations. Okay, then maybe this guy knows what he's talking about, like with team leadership too. But I think it generally starts with impressing younger players with the ability to understand Overwatch. What do you do if you have 1 or 2 people on the team trust you? Trust. How do you go about building with them specifically? Frankly, the answer is that you coast as best as you possibly can. You build camaraderie with the players that trust you as best as you possibly can. You continue to try to build the trust and the ownership with the players that are resistant to that change. And then ultimately, down the road, if you've earned the trust of the majority of the team, you kick the players from the team. Straight up. I'm not going to mince words. There's a lot of situations I've had where if players just refuse to buy in, they're gone. But you have to earn that position. You have to earn that position. But that's a long-term thing. You have to earn the right to do that. And I know that's hard to hear, but that's the truth. There's been several teams I've worked with where we absolutely had to make that decision. But that's something that you have to, and trust me, if you do a good job with leadership, you will not even have to make that decision by yourself. You will not even need to make that decision by yourself. How would you deal with someone as a new coach that doesn't respect or dismiss you? See the previous answer. Build camaraderie and trust with the players within that system as much as you possibly can. Don't even let there be a question that person is being unreasonable. And then when the time is right, they're gone. And continue to be respectful and kind to that person as an individual, right? Continue to be respectful and kind to that person as an individual. This doesn't need to be like some sort of a snake, like you're trying to snake them out of the team. Give them every opportunity to, don't give them a single reason to think that you're being disrespectful or unkind to them. But, okay. Other questions I am going to have to skip because we're going to move on, but I hope that at least sets some of the answers right. Okay. So you understand what you expect from the team in terms of performance and trust. As in, hey, this team, we can perform at X level. I think these level of expectations, like we're definitely aiming high. We have the capability for aiming high. So now, I'll have to scribble all this out. This is why we always use Microsoft Paint. Now we set expectations. Now, the first thing to kind of highlight here, in the obvious one is, expectations in terms of results. Yeah, sure. But that's not necessarily the most important expectations. Basically, when we're talking about expectations, we're not talking about results exactly. We're talking about what you expect from the individual players and what you expect from the team as a whole. And this is not necessarily just improvement mindset. When you know the level of trust that you have from the team, and you know how serious the team is about taking this next goal or accomplishing this goal, we need to set expectations about how we practice, how often we practice, right? Like what we can, like how we progress, like what's our level of progress, like what are our goals as individuals, as a team. And this applies to both individual and as a team. Essentially, what is one step further ahead than where we are right now? And we'll get to that, like what that is. But you kind of need to sit down with yourself, with your organization, with your team, and think about like, guys, like this is where we're at. Where is the next step? What can we expect? So we want to be winning masters, face it, whatever else. What do we need to do? What set of expectations is reasonable to match that goal? Is it a scrim every day? Is it 2 scrims every day? How often do we need to be team reviewing? What kind of progress should we be making with our compositional choices right here? Really, this is, again, goes back to like, what is the next step based off of that? So basically, this is taking the level where the team is now and thinking, where can we go from there? What's the next step? And we'll talk more in detail about what this looks like in terms of progress and practice, because this is really feedback here. And this is really team practice right here. But essentially, one step ahead of where we are, communicate those exactly, and make sure that you're being very clear with what you expect. I think one of the biggest problems that a lot of coaches make is that once they just know that their level of trust, they're not very clear with communicating expectations. They're not really clear with communicating expectations. Like that needs to be very clear of like what you're expecting from the team, both in practice and what you're expecting from the team in terms of individual performance. And we'll talk more about like what that should be when we get to the feedback session. Any questions on this topic here before we move on here? This one is a little bit shorter before we move on. Give you guys just a few seconds here to type up. Take your time. How do you know where to set expectations? That's based off of the level, right? That's based off of the level. How high ranked are your teammates? What is your scrim performance like, right? What level of trust do they have in you? and in each other? How long have they been playing together? How's the meta looking like for y'all's hero pool? I think one of the anecdotes here that I'll pull out is Christopher. So Christopher did a really great job of this early on in London Spitfires Season 2 when I was with him. And one of the things that Christopher did is very good at knowing the team's level and then adjusting expectations accordingly. So a lot of you guys might think that like Christopher came tearing in, like we want to win, we're going to pop off, we're going to completely turn this organization inside out. And scrims were super strict, and he was draconian and beating everybody over the head with a mallet. But the reality is that the start of that season was more along of Christopher, one of the first things that he did, he's like, yeah, we're going to suck this season most likely, but let's start by not sucking as bad as Vancouver Titans, or let's not be a bottom tier team. We need to win. We need to focus on trying to win the games that we should win. And that was kind of a shock for some of the players, right? Like, what? A coach going in there saying that we're not going to win every game? But the reality is that was a reasonable expectation given the level of team that we had. One step at a time. It's not admirable or good leadership to be like, hey, we're a Masters average team in terms of rank. We're going to win Face It League. That's stupid. That's discouraging. That's frustrating. That's not how practice and improvement works. So Chris went in there, set the expectations just a little bit higher from what we thought was immediately reasonable, made compositional choices that were reasonable. We didn't button ourselves or walk ourselves into playing Rein only, but that was our starting point, and we developed our dive execution off of that. And then we only raised our expectations when our level increased. In addition to that, I think Chris did a good job that year too, where he was very careful with how strict he was discipline-wise until he had earned players' trust. He actually became more and more and more strict as the trust increased, but he played his cards right. And this is as a head coach in an Overwatch League team. So don't be unreasonable. Don't set expectations way beyond where you can possibly aim at this current point in time. You need to set your expectations one step ahead with the tools that you have. And because tools can evolve and get better, then that doesn't mean that we're stuck there forever. That just means we need to be moving one step at a time. How do you align with players if not all of them share the same expectations you want to put out, even if you're past trust and level? That's a great question. So by far, maybe the most difficult thing with team leadership is having teams where expectations and level are vastly different. I'll give you guys an extreme example. The first season I was with London Spitfire, okay, I join in, we're 0-8. I will be frank with you guys. I've said this publicly. That team needed to cut around 2 or 3 of their players. Unquestionably, they needed to be gone. Now, I was not the head coach. I could not make that decision, and maybe it was too late in the season to make that decision because those players had given up. They had just given up. And so their expectations and their level were never going to match some of the other players that were in, okay? That being said, that can be a very difficult decision to make. And more often than not, you rarely have such an extreme example. That's almost always a problem. There's always going to be a little bit of variance with how hard teams want to win or what the level of expectation is. So how do you align if they're not all the same level? Well, they're never going to be perfectly aligned. The question is, are you setting expectations equal to that individual's performance? Let me give you guys an example. Let's say that your best player in your team is the DPS player, right? You have an insane tracer player, your backline sucks, okay? Support players boosted, worst role, those guys suck, okay? Your team expectations needs to be a combination of everybody's performance, right? So not quite as good as your tracer player, not quite as bad as your backline. However, for individual expectations, you're expecting a little more from your tracer player and you refuse to back down. Just because your tracer player is your best player doesn't mean that he or she can't get better. And the same thing applies to your backline. So I've done this exact thing with many of my goofy college or high school teams. Hey, you're a gold player. You need to start playing like a plat player. This is what we're going to do to get there. This is what I have expectations from you. And be frank. Be like, hey, listen, guys, like the level of expectation is a little bit different because there's a clear variance in terms of the performance and level between each player. But if I'm the Grandmaster player and I have a Platinum support player that's really getting feedback and working hard to be a Diamond player, then unless I'm unreasonable, I'm going to be okay with that. Or more okay with it than I wouldn't be. The difficulties come when players can sense that the weak link of the team is making zero effort to progress. Not within reason, just making zero effort. Yes, your expectations drive from your level. But yeah, generally when you're making teams, you want to have as coherent of a vision and level as you possibly can. And if there is a significant gap between players' level, then you're going to have tension. There's just no way of getting around it. To ease that pain, you need to set individual expectations for every single player and hope for the best. Do you feel the need to rein in the expectations of stronger players? It can be. For team expectations, yes. Why practice is put in with expectations and not training? Because I'm saying you need to have expectations of what your practice is going to look like. This is especially important for teams that are not at the professional level, because if you are a plat team with plat players, saying that guys, we're going to scrim every day is not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So your expectations about how practice or how frequent practice is, it just needs to change. If you're talking about the Overwatch League level, generally the type or quantity of practice is quite different, but you can definitely have variance in the quality of practice. Do you ever, okay, we already said, we'll give about 30 more seconds before we move on. What do you do with players who aren't meeting expectations but are showing the effort? I mean, the point is the intent, not the output, right? Sometimes players get stuck. Sometimes players need time to develop. If they're putting in the effort, that is your expectation, right? That is your expectation. That's like saying, what do we do if we're not winning games when we're working really hard and scrimmaging? Keep up the good work. Now, maybe your approach is wrong. Maybe their approach is wrong. Maybe they need to take a step back, or maybe you're just unlucky, or maybe they just need time. I mean, if you really want the answer, guys, like you need to boil this down to like its most granular thing. Like, what do I do when the Plat Mercy I'm coaching is training really hard and working really hard at their movement, and it's not immediately paying off? It's like, well, they're doing the right things. Trust the process, right? Maybe approach it from a different direction if they really are hard stuck weeks and months later. But the effort is what matters. The effort's what matters. I mean, guys, this is like, I'm going to be corny here, but this is parenting. This is what you're doing is a little analogy for parenting, or teaching. If you are working with your child and they're really trying to get better at riding the bicycle, or they're really doing their best to please you, or they really care a lot about what you think, or they're really trying to work hard at their math homework. That's what matters, right? That's what matters. It's the input, the expectations need to be matched, right? And if they are, then you need to trust them. Any other questions here? One last thing I'll say, last little thing, because this is incredibly common with younger people, especially. I say that like the boomer that I am. Younger people are really bad at setting expectations. Like really, really bad at setting expectations, reasonable expectations. Every single person that I coach under the age of 20 is convinced that they want to be Grandmaster or champion or pro. And it's not saying that that's not possible, but you have to put in so much effort consistently over a long period of time. And so a lot of people's expectations when they are younger are a lot more volatile and a lot more wrong. See the Christopher example earlier. It is insanity for the London Spitfire that season to expect to beat Korean teams in dive from the get-go. Is it insanity for them to expect to beat Korean teams ever in dive? Absolutely not. But the way to get there is not by saying we're going to beat Korean teams with dive now. So it is immature hubris to set unreasonable expectations right off the bat and then get frustrated and burned out when you don't have those right away. And it's your job as a coach to mitigate that and fight that as best as you possibly can. Push players when they're not pushing themselves, and then don't let players be discouraged when they don't find immediate positive reinforcement or immediate success, because it takes time, a lot of effort and a lot of time. So you need to fight both the unwillingness to push themselves, but also the immediate harsh frustration and cataclysmic disappointment when people don't immediately succeed at stuff. What constitutes as young? I'm not going to answer that question because that's going to date me. So, okay, let's talk about feedback. So, you have expectations. Where are we at? What can I reasonably expect from this team, from both how fast or how much we can progress, and what level of effort that we can put in. So now we get to the feedback. Okay, so we have our expectations. How do we go about approaching these expectations? And that's really where we get to feedback. And when I say feedback, I don't just mean scrimmage coaching. We'll talk about that later. I don't just mean VOD reviews. I mean the entire team communicating, deciding what are we actually doing with these expectations now. So we know what we can accomplish. Like, let's go back to that Chris example. Okay, we can play these Rhine comps decently. We can win some matches. We can start to experiment with dive maps. So how do we get there? What do we do? And really, you want players to their agency, to their competency, to their trust, to their buy-in. We'll talk about that in a second. Take ownership in deciding what's to do. So we have these expectations. Now what do we do with them? And this is where talking with players helps a lot. Let me give you guys an example here. So when I first joined the London Spitfire, the first thing I did after I was signed on is I met with each player individually. And I asked them 2 questions. One, what are you unhappy with the team? What frustrates you with the team? What can the team be doing better? What do you think the team... And then the second thing was like, what do you think that we need to be doing differently or better? Largely, not just, like compositions or strategy, but I let players kind of vent their feedback and get their advice on like what needs to be done better. So there was an immediate ownership of those solutions. And why I did this is because when we started to actually give feedback about how we want to approach compositions or how we want to approach practice or how we want to approach our mentality or whatever else, I wasn't just making up crap myself. I was using their own words against them. Not against them in terms of a weapon, but I was reinforcing what they were saying. You would be surprised at how often players are correct about what they ought to do and how infrequently the players actually do it. And that's where you come in. So if you have a lot of trust with players, the players really trust you, that should not be the green light to just completely dominate what and where, how things need to be done. If your players have a reasonable macro understanding, then you allow them to create their own feedback, and then you reinforce that. Let me give you guys an example. When we first started working with let me go way back here. Okay, goats. Phase 2, long time ago, goats meta. It was my responsibility, the team's expectation of me, based off of the trust that they had, for me to teach them some of the fundamentals of goats. Great. But the more that we practiced, the more that we taught goats, the better the players got at it, the more agency I gave to the players to provide their own feedback. So you need to ask yourself in your situation right now, with the compositions that we're playing, with the team review structure that we're playing, with the practice structure that we have, with the macro understanding that we have, to what level do I trust the players to provide their own feedback? Where are our biggest strengths? Where are our biggest weaknesses? One of the big adjustments that we made with London when I joined on the first season was as soon as the players proved to me that they actually understood how to play a composition on a map in a situation, I would actually make the VOD reviews collaborative. And what that meant is I would literally assign Hadi Kellex, you guys have to coach what we needed to do better on the Anubis attack. See you guys tomorrow. You have 15 minutes tomorrow. And they had to come up with it. And guess what? When the players would put the work and the effort into preparation and study themselves, they 100% would be bought into that solution. It wouldn't just be simply learning and following. They would actually be applying the feedback and studying it themselves. Now, that's not the green light for you to just not be checked in whatsoever into the preparation whatsoever. You should be studying it too. Come up with your own ideas. Keep them accountable. If they come in with garbage ideas, we're going to have to talk about that. But to their competency, you give them agency. Again, going back to that parenting analogy. Do you let a 1-year-old decide whether they should cross the street or not? Or whether they should put their finger in an electrical outlet? Absolutely not. They do not have the agency or knowledge or competency to make those decisions for themselves. But one of the key points of good parenting is as the child's age increases, maturity and responsibility grows, then they are given more agency into their own decisions. A bad parent says, oh, you always have high agency. You could do anything or whatever you want. There's a couple people in my life right now, won't name any names, that have this gentle parenting mindset where they basically allow their child to do anything and whatever they want. And guess what? The child makes terrible decisions. And that actively not only hurt the parent and people around them, but actively hurt the child. That's bad parenting. On the flip side, you have people that even as the child's maturity and responsibility and competency grows, they're never given responsibility and never given agency and never given leadership and are never allowed to make any decisions. This is also bad. Not only will kids hate this and resent you for it, but they're also going to be growing up essentially stunted with the inability to think on the fly. The analogy here is that, and the Overwatch analogy is, I have worked with teams that have zero structure and zero leadership. And so the players are not only incompetent, but don't know how to make, but are essentially, they're given the agency all the time, even when they're not necessarily have earned it. So they swap the compositions randomly. There's no vision or leadership of the macro theory. There's no goals. There's no structure. There's infighting. That's too much gentle parenting, right? On the flip side, I have worked with teams and seen teams that only follow a set system, set structure, zero flexibility, do exactly what the coach says, memorize the rollouts, memorize the counter swaps, and the second that the match hits them, the second that the unfamiliar strikes, the second as, oh wait, I haven't downloaded the solution for that happens, they completely go to crap. They are completely incapable of making decisions or adjusting on the fly because the players are not leaders. They're puppets. And that is equally bad. Your job is the players are given the ability to make decisions, adjust, and learn on the fly, given more agency in both reviews, scrimmages, compositional choices, as they have earned the responsibility and right to do so. And a great example of this is Sparker. So Sparker, when I worked with, I'm going to keep using analogies here because I think it's helpful. When I worked with Sparker on Soldier 76 during that season, I told Sparker what to do. And I told him why. I didn't just tell him what to do, I told him why. I said, you need to angle, and you need to tell Admiral to come with you because you have visor, and you need to go for a deep flank here because of the layering. Okay, you need to play this one more carefully because of this. You need to do this rollout, and this is exactly why. And I said, shut up and listen to me, and he listened to me, okay? That was where we were here, okay? We were here. Weeks in, our reviews looked a lot different because Sparker started to understand the reason why we were doing things, and he got more familiar with it. And so my reviews would start to be like, Sparker, you're doing a great job with X, X, and Y. Z. What do you think about this angle here? And he would give me almost always a very good answer. I'd be like, Sparker's learning. He's understanding the fundamentals of what we're expecting from him and why. And then by the end, months in, I was still giving feedback to Sparker. That never really goes away. That's the whole point of being a coach. But for the most part, Sparker was insanely good at recognizing his own shortcomings, his own errors, not just from the strategy standpoint, but also from a communicational standpoint. And so it made my job easier, yes, but more importantly, Sparker was a more complete, cohesive, and reactive instinctual player. He had grown up. He was an adult playing Soldier 76, not a child. And the same thing happens with every single player that I've ever individually worked with, and that includes teams too. As their competency increases, their ownership, their leadership increases. So you set individual expectations about compositions. This is what we're running based off of the trust the team has with you. This is how we're practicing. This is what we're doing. But as their competency increases, your job as a leader is to let individuals take responsibility equal to their competency. That's what growing up, that's what leadership is. And these need to be communicated clearly, right? This need to be communicated clearly in terms of responsibilities. There needs to be no question about what my expectations are, what my feedback is for my ult tracker, what I expect from my ult tracker. There needs to be no second guessing about what the responsibility is for compositional choices or who decides what swap or who communicates in this flank. You need to be communicated clearly. And bonus points here if you let players decide on the consequences for not following these. One of the key things in that seminar that I linked was Askoff talking about practice expectations, practice feedback about how they needed to be on time for VOD reviews. He didn't tell them what the punishments for showing up late were. He let them decide what the punishments for being late was. And then you know what Askoff did? He stuck with it. I don't remember exactly what he said the punishment was. It might have been a fine or something like that. But guess what? You guys said this was the punishment. I'm holding you accountable to it. I didn't decide it. I'm just holding you accountable to it. Does that make sense? I know this was a very complicated topic. We'll go into more detail once we get into training. But the TLDR is that you essentially train your players based off of their competency and allow them to take leadership from there. You're providing feedback all along these lines. But this is not just about in-game feedback, but also letting them have some sort of ownership and agency in how the team is run. Okay. Questions? How do you judge a team's knowledge and competency? Because it depends on level, right? Yes, absolutely. Depends on level. 100% depends on level. Like I wouldn't expect a 4K team to be understand a composition the same depth as an expert team. So how do we adapt our assessment of competency depending on the level? Well, if you look at each individual, right? If your team is overperforming, the reality of the situation too is that like 4K teams might not have the mechanical competency, but will have the knowledge, the base knowledge of how the game works to be able to make their own decisions with compositions. Like they can be adults. They're just not very good mechanical adults, you know? But how do you judge a team's knowledge competency? Because it depends on the level, right? Essentially, you're asking, how do I coach? Right? That's your job. Your job is to know what the next step is. Your job is to go, okay, hey, we are doing very well. The team is doing a great job understanding what compositions we run and why. We're overperforming at our level. And then that's it. That's it. Team runs itself. Team basically runs itself. What if there's a large difference in competence between players? Then again, goes back to the expectations. You set competence expectations depending on the player. You set expectations depending on the player. Like for example, the Sparker example. I never had to have a conversation, very rarely with Hadi, about communicational expectations. I very rarely had to coach Hadi with communication because he was incredibly competent at communication. Now I still push him to do better, but he earned the right to not have to. I didn't have to necessarily tell him how to communicate because he was incredibly good at it. Would you say Master GM players can make choices? Dude, bronze players can make choices. Silver players can make choices up to their competency. You need to start getting, players need to start making choices as soon as they possibly can. As soon as you possibly can. When I worked with a gold Genji player today. Gold Genji player. And when I'm VOD reviewing the gold Genji player, I'm explaining the fundamentals of what I expect and why. And then he now has the agency to choose when and where to go in live coaching. And then we go back and review it, and I'm with him. But then he goes back and he does it again. You need to start training players to think for themselves immediately, just to their level of competency. How would you provide a balanced level of feedback, not overpraising, but also not giving backhanded responses? We'll talk about that in a little bit in the training aspect. I'll kind of explain what I mean in terms of the review side of things. Thoughts on people having to play people they don't wish to, or what? I'm not sure I understand the question. Hadi mentioned. Bro had that screenshot saved from 3 years ago. But like for context, for like to kind of run with that analogy, like I 4-year-olds need agency and need explanation of why. Now, do they need an expectation of everything? No. Do they need but 100%. 100%. 4-year-old decides, explain why eating the vegetables are good, why we have a good bedtime. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? Like you need to train them up, you know? It's the same thing. Oh, you're a Doom OT and you need to play D.Va? Well, I mean, that you might just want to talk with your team. Do you want to learn D.Va? If the answer is no, then your team's goals and your goals are at a split, and so you either reconcile your differences or you find a new team. Okay. Any last questions here before we jump into training? And this is the juicer. When you're learning a new hero or comp, do you start really lax or really strict before determining their level of competency? I would say let it be lax for a little bit at the start. Like the experimentation, players should feel free to be able to make mistakes and experiment and try new things. And then that level, as their competency at the composition increases, then your level of expectations increase. They should feel okay to experiment without being criticized, or they should feel free to experiment and try different things. But yeah. So what I'm saying is that feedback should work in tandem with helping players become more independent in their own decision making. That's correct. That's correct. Okay, we're going to move on to training here. So training is the final one here. And training is like I said, the really, really important one, because training is all about how do we actually apply the feedback? Like, what do we actually do with this? Now, this one is going to be by far the most discombobulated, the most messy one, because it's really hard to kind of like, it's really hard to find the 4 bullet points TED Talk for training. Like, there isn't something juicy and saucy. So what I would recommend for you guys here, if you haven't already been doing this already, is instead of trying to digest this entire like cornucopia here, there's just too much to digest. Instead, focus on like 1 or 2 facets that's immediately applicable to your situation and something that you can actually train. In the same way that I don't coach a bronze Genji player by giving him a 2-hour diatribe, each individual player might need a tailored approach and needs a couple of things to work on, but you don't need to do everything at the same time. I don't even apply these concepts consistently myself perfectly. Okay, so once we know our expectations, our goals, we need accountability. And this could be agreed upon by the, that's a double C, by the way, agreed upon by the team, but we need to do the things that we're supposed to do. We go in with a set of expectations that this is what a team review should look like. This is how often that we should team review. Okay, we're going to stick with it. This is the amount of time that we have to scrimmage, so this is what we're going to do. This is the amount of time that we have to do individual review, so this is what we're going to do. You need to be consistent, and your team needs to know what to expect from you and from the team day in, day out, with a set of consequences that are agreed upon by the players. The worst thing that you can be as a parent or as a coach is inconsistent. Worst thing, what does this mean? No volatile, no inconsistent. You do not let some things slide because, no, you do not let them slide. You do not let bad scrims happen. You do not skip VOD reviews if there isn't a good reason for it. You do not give half effort in scrims. You do not skip scrims. You essentially, what you allow to happen, that is the new bar. When you let scrims happen with low effort, if you let team reviews just be coasted by, you have now set that as the new norm. That is the new norm. And even worse, if you're the type of person that lets bad training, bad practice happen, and then all of a sudden you get angry or you explode and you go, why aren't we trying hard? And all of a sudden you get motivated because you watch that one David Goggins episode, and all of a sudden you're motivated. You are the definition of unstable and a bad leader. I'm not saying you need to be strict about everything. I'm saying go back to your level, go back to your expectation, go back to your feedback, and then change that with training. If that means, guys, we're a plat team, we scrimmage twice a week, we can just have fun, set a couple of nice light training goals and review once a week, that's fine. But we need to stick with that. We need to stick with that as best as we possibly can and not take it too seriously. If you're a freaking Overwatch League team and we're scrimming for 4 hours a day and we expect high levels of effort and that high level of effort's not being met and there's no compositional division, even though we should have and we agreed upon that and people are showing up late to scrims, if you allow that to happen, that is on you. That is on you. You cannot let this happen. By far, the biggest sin in practice is a lack of accountability of effort. A lack of accountability and effort. To the point to where, this is a hot take, it would be better if you have this level of leadership and trust with your team. Most of you guys won't have this, but this is kind of an extreme example. It is better to cancel a scrim in the middle of a map if the level of effort isn't there than it is to continue to scrim. I wish that more coaches did this, that had the agency and the trust to be able to do this, to literally call, hey, sorry, GGs, we're going to have to call it right now and just end it right there. Because nothing is worse than reinforcing bad behavior. Practice has to be earned. You don't get the right to practice if you don't show up and give the effort. And if you do that, if you have the agency and the trust to be able to pull that plug, your players that is going to scare the crud out of your players, because they're going to know exactly why. They're going to know better, and they're going to go, man, we are not allowed not to. Now, at the same time, you can't be inconsistent. If the level of effort is there, but the performance isn't, you don't tear into them. If they did the best that they could, if the effort was there, the expectation is not necessarily in the result, it's on the effort. And so you need to be patient. So this is not about being meaner or crueler or more draconian. In fact, the action of calling the scrim isn't even done with anger or rage or even disappointment. It's almost robotic. We're not hurdling the bar, so we're done. It's very important. Very important. No wasted scrim time within level of expectations. Again, to your level, right? Like GM players, I'm sorry, you're probably not taking the game seriously enough to where every scrim fight needs to be absolute sweaty. Again, this needs to match your level. My extreme example is probably for professional teams only. I think that needs to be said. Okay? Also, individual and team goals need to be clear. A lot of the times, apprehension can become a consequence of a lack of feedback. Clarity of goals. This is one of the most difficult things for coaches to do. Let me give you guys an example. A lot of team reviews that I have worked with over the years accidentally wound up being what I like to call buffet reviews, where all we do is we watch all the mistakes that we made with no real clarity about what to do about them next time. Or an emphasis on compositional matchup. Oh, we played this one team that has that ball OTP, and we need to figure out how we play versus ball OTPs, and then you end up never scrimmaging that team again. Does that sound familiar? Huge problem. When players go into a scrimmage or a map, regardless of what the map is, regardless of what the matchup is, there should be a very clear idea, either individually or as a team, about exactly what needs to be done in that match or in that series. Zero expectations. And so that might mean you need to shift your goals to be something that isn't dependent upon composition. But if there's ever any lack of clarity about what the purpose of this map, this exact moment is, you have failed as a coach. That's where team reviews come into play. That's where individual review comes into play. That's where a little bit of scrim feedback comes into play. We'll talk about that later. And then these need to be generally like the lowest hanging fruit. So lowest hanging fruit, easy stuff, right? The big stuff, the big things that need to be practiced. I do think mixing it up for the sake of variety can be important, but this needs to be big, easy stuff. Does this make sense? Clear goals, feedback, and training, and then clear accountability for both the team reviews, the individual reviews, and the scrims. Does this make sense? I'll jump to the questions here in a second before I elaborate on each of these points. Accountability is keeping people sticking with the goals that are both reasonable based off of their level and that have been communicated to you. Okay? Remember when I said earlier where young people are going to be very much, oh, we need to win this and this and this? You don't keep them accountable to that. You look at your team reasonably and say, it is reasonable for this team to give good effort and 2 scrim blocks a week, 1 VOD review a week, and I think it's reasonable if that everybody shows up on time or at most 5 minutes late, given the fact that some of these guys are coming from college classes. That is an accountability to what is reasonable given the level that you're playing and the level of dedication that you have. If you were to fine your random GM team $50 for showing up late 5 minutes to a scrim, that would be unreasonable because your expectations and level evaluations are completely off. If you are randomly scrimmaging with gold players and you're scrimmaging 4 or 5 times a week and then you're getting mad when not everyone can make it because their kid Susie has a softball game, you know, like you're being unreasonable on your expectations and your level. Does that make sense? And they go into scrimmages and people are kind of swapping a little bit too much or whatever, and you're flaming people for not locking in and playing, guys, we need to play Kiriko Lucio at gold 4. You know, like that's unreasonable expectations and levels. So you need an honest evaluation of where your team is at and what is expected from your team. Very important. Very, 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 very important. And keep in mind that players will often overshoot expectations during meetings and underperform when push comes to shove. Everybody wants to scrimmage 5 days a week and show up perfectly and be fine. So it's up to you to kind of maybe dial it back a little bit, you know, and then keep them accountable to it. Keep them accountable to it. Everyone talks a real big game until push comes to shove. So you need to kind of dial it down from that initial, dude, I cannot stop watching this stupid ball gif, Soren. What have you done? I'm completely hooked. I feel like I'm watching Marvel Rivals. I cannot stop watching it. But yeah, you kind of need to dial it back a little bit because people are going to always talk big crap, but then keep them accountable to that. Okay. Any other questions about the training accountability? Clarity of goals. Again, you can kind of utilize the players to give what that accountability looks like. Freaking Harms. I'm not answering that question. I'm sorry that you guys had to deal with Harms. Do you guys even know who Harms? Oh my gosh. I can't do this, man. I literally just can't do this. Dude, it's not even a good Subway Surfer gif. I hate you, Harms. I despise your very existence. See, that's a good example of bad expectations. I don't know why I'm getting so hot and bothered over Harms when, the bar is set so incredibly low, My expectations should be lowered, and so I should be less upset. How do you handle players with unreasonable expectations? Very, very carefully and very patiently. It can be very difficult to do so. Whether they're unreasonable expectations for themselves or for their team, that's just a sign of immaturity. And you just need to set a good example with the way that you're communicating things. Like, for example, I worked with a player, I won't say who, you guys might know him, who had extremely unreasonable expectations for both the team that I was coaching and himself. And I would tell him straight up, yeah, you're completely being unreasonable. And I'll explain why. And sure enough, team would underperform or he would underperform, and tears and crying and disaster and explosions. But I would always stay in his corner and be like, yeah, hey, that's unreasonable. You're doing a good job. Don't worry about it, And now, obviously, is he still upset? Of course he's still upset. Nothing's really particularly changed, but he knows that I'm in his corner. At the same time, when this player is not matching up to the expectations or level that I think, then I'm going to be pushing him a little bit. But eventually, through osmosis and time, they'll start to kind of adapt and adopt your mindset, which is exactly what happened to an extent. But yeah, some players, I'm not going to go down the psychology of it, are very, very bad at setting reasonable expectations. And you just need to show up day in, day out and be consistent. You need to be the constant. They will learn to adopt that mindset. It just will take time. Examples of types of actions keeps player accountable. Like I said, for fines, that's definitely not something that you guys are necessarily going to talk about. But I would have suspensions, people that are not allowed to participate in scrimmages, canceling Scrimbox entirely, canceling reviews entirely. I would keep a tally of things. I hate to be that guy, but I would absolutely be keeping track of individuals that are not performing or not showing up or meeting up to examples. And then, frankly, if that happens over and over again, hold a team meeting. Hey guys, we're gonna have to sit here and talk about so-and-so not showing up on time. I need you guys to kind of talk about like what are again, that's more of a situation where you're more of a volunteer coach. But generally you are very limited with what you can do. Player gets benched, you skip scrim, you skip review. And I think if that keeps happening, I think that at that point in time the player just needs to go. Okay, we move on. So this is where we get to the brass tacks, so to speak. How the frick do we scrim? How do we scrim? Training, accountability, how do we scrim? I'm going to do the professional thing and just scroll down there. See, brand new white page. How do we scrim? Here's how we scrim. Okay, scrim. A brilliant idea, guys. Set goals. As I already said, goals that are based off of intent and are not compositionally specific. Basically, you need to fight the tendency to do not win scrims only. Okay? Let me give you guys an example. There are two sides of this coin here. One is you want to put in the effort in every single scrim as if it's a tournament. Twisted Minds is really famous for this. A lot of the better teams that I've coached, almost all of the best teams that I have coached have all provided the highest level of effort in scrimmages. There's a 1-to-1 correlation with effort in scrims and performance during matches. The problem is that sometimes if the intent is only on winning the scrim, then we forget about what we were supposed to practice during the scrim. So the concept is that if I'm going in with the intent to win, I'm going to play safe. I'm going to play to my strengths. I'm not really going to be trying to adapt, try anything new, or change my approach to things. Let's say that we need to work on a support ult layering or a push-pull, right? That might mean that we change some of the things that we play a little bit worse during that training progress, that training procedure. You need to encourage your players to be okay with performing a little bit worse while we're doing this. So what this means is for your feedback, you need to reinforce this. So if you feel like, oh, we won the map, but we didn't practice what we were supposed to, then we have failed at this topic. But if we were really trying with the support ult layering and we lost the map, heck, maybe we even played worse than we normally did, then that is a success because we actually achieved the goal. Your feedback needs to be exclusively focused on what was the intent with that map. What was the intent with that scrimmage? You need a clarity of what that is, obviously, based off of review, but then you actually need to continually reinforce that level of effort. Don't go, yeah, good job with the support ult layering, guys, but we just need to make sure that we're consistently taking angles. And no, shut the frick up, you moron. Shut up. Shut up. Do your job. Did they do the good job with the support ult layering? Good. Did they do a perfect job with the support ult layering? Great. You know what they do when they do a perfect job with the support ult layering, which is the entire intent of the thing? You say, great job, guys. And that's all you say. And that's all you say. That's it. You don't say a word. Let's do it again. That's what you say. Now, if you say, okay, the support ult layering was good, but we need to do a better job on this fight. We screwed up the combo with this fight or whatever with the support ult layering. Then you will go the PCP. Okay, always do PCP, guys. Praise, correct, praise. Basically, this is good. I think on the support ult layering, we could have done this better, but this was also good at the end there, right? My old buddy used to call it the positivity sandwich, right? The mindset is that you need to reinforce what you're saying. You say, guys, we don't try to win the scrim. We focus on setting goals and we do our best to practice those goals. Right. So are you reinforcing that? Or are you undercutting that? When you sign up your kid for T-ball and you say winning doesn't matter, just go out there and have fun, and then you're the guy that's going to sit there in the car and yell at your 5-year-old kid for, missing the ball, you're not reinforcing that goal. You're lying. You're a liar. Are you as a coach, are you a liar? Are you a liar as a coach? Are you saying things that are important to you, but then completely second guessing that every single time? Your teammates, your players are not idiots. They'll pick up on that. Trust me, they're already struggling with, nobody likes to lose even when you're practicing. So you have to reinforce that against human nature. People by nature are risk averse. Practicing goals is risk aversion, or the opposite of risk aversion, excuse me. It is practicing, it's stepping outside your comfort zone. So you must reinforce that. The only two things that matter is, did we practice what we wanted to practice? And did we give effort? That's it. Effort. I would go so far to say that you need to avoid the urge to sound smart by providing meaningless or unactionable feedback. This is one of the reasons why I used to hate, back in the day, a lot of scrim trials, like coaches trials where like you give live feedback during scrims, which was basically just rattling off all the little things that they did wrong during the map that wouldn't be relevant in the next map, right? I hated that crap so much, and you need to avoid doing that yourself. Don't be obsessed with the sound of your own voice. I understand the irony of me saying that as I'm yapping away, but yeah. Challenge player leadership to step on during the match. Have your feedback aligned with the goal so that it's immediately actionable in the next map, and then praise. The reason why praise is so important and why it's PCP is not because love and sun and kisses and wonderful things. It's because the biggest way to provoke change is to catch players doing the right thing. To catch players doing the right thing. Nothing provokes positive change more than seeing someone do what they were supposed to do with the intent of the match and then just giving them a big sloppy kiss right in the forehead in front of everybody, right? And then they file a harassment suit against you and then you have to quit your job. Long story. But yeah, basically you want to catch them doing the right thing. They need to feel good about doing the right thing. Not just, oh, okay, we need to do better with this, but you need to feel good about doing the right thing. Reinforce the good behavior. Don't just correct the bad. Very, very important. And the reason why I emphasize that so much isn't just because it's super, super important, but because it's very easy to fall into the mindset of criticize, and only criticize. Anybody can criticize, but can you catch when it's done well? Okay, does that make sense? So biggest feedback I have for scrims, go in with a set purposes from a review. We'll get to how to do that later. Reinforce what you're practicing for that review over and over and over and over and over and over again with praise, correction, and praise off of that topic, and demand high effort. And then if you have nothing to say, no correction, then just don't say anything. Praise and move on. Questions from that. Now that sounds simple. That's all you need to do that's all you need to do during scrims. Scrims are not meant to teach concepts. Scrims are not meant to sit there and sound smart. Scrims don't need 15-minute pauses between maps. Everyone's fresh. Everyone gives effort. Move on. Everyone's fresh. Everyone gives effort. Move on. They are drills. They are not seminars. Questions? Positive reinforcement is much more effective in training dogs. It's better in all situations. Yeah, you want to catch them doing the right thing, correct the incorrect behavior, and then again catch them doing the right thing. And remember, the incorrect behavior is related to what we were supposed to practice. We're not correcting uncorrelated behavior, because the nature of practice is that we're giving conscious effort on X, but we're kind of autopiloting or instinctively acting on everything else. So if you start correcting this and then this and then this and then this, you're essentially doing the buffet review, the coaching, where you're trying to give them 5 different things and they don't really know where to give their intent or where they're to give their focus. You're allowing players to autopilot while they're working on something else. What about micro tips in such text and specific matchups? Same thing. It's really difficult to work on micro tech, but if you can find a way to boil it down so that it is applicable over at least several times in a match or a map, then it's relatively useful. Yeah. Is it possible to do this as a player, or is the authority of a coach needed? I think it's good to do as a player. I mean, you have to be careful with correction because you may not always have the full context of why a mistake, at least your perceived mistake, is. But I think if, like, one of the best teams that I have worked with were teams that were very willing to compliment each other for doing good things, especially when it was related to the, like, dude, nice call, dude. Like, that feels good. That feels freaking good. How do you manage practicing one thing, but it's player dependent vision and perform worse overall? That's exactly what we expect. Now, players are just not going to like that all the time, but it's your job to make sure that the players that you are reinforcing that is being a totally acceptable part of the team culture. Yeah, we're okay with that. Now, do you have performance scrims where you go in and you just play your best? Absolutely. I would go as far to say that you should have a performance scrim in 25-30% of your scrims. In other words, like every third or fourth scrim could be a performance scrim where players are just playing their best and doing their best, and your job is just to make sure that the effort is high. But I mean, yeah, that's just how practice works. The reality is that there is no such thing as drills in Overwatch, almost without exception, whether we're talking about individual or team performance. So if you are unable to bring that level of divorcing yourself from the outcome, then your players are going to really struggle with performing. Okay, any last questions for scrims before we talk about how to handle reviews, and I'll give a brief demonstration of how to handle reviews. But the reality is that, like, all the complicated stuff is behind us, right? It's just being able to consistently provide effort during scrims and reviews, and then that's a lot right there. Good coaching is not easy, but good coaching is not complicated. Should you work on communicating better or micro better? Both. Why not both? What's the lowest hanging fruit for you? Mix, and also keep in mind that you should mix up goals. Like, I think maybe that's worth keeping in mind. We'll talk about this more with reviews, but goals communicated for scrims should not be hammered on for years. You know, it should be hammered on enough to where that we get enough repetition to provoke change, maybe a couple of scrim blocks, and then we should move on. Because otherwise it gets boring, player effort doesn't continue to move through, and then we move on. We'll give it maybe 1 or 2 more questions, then we'll move on to reviews. Is it unreasonable to have an expectation that players keep negative feedback to minimum during scrims live gameplay? Yes and no. Like, the key thing is that negative feedback relevant to what we're practicing? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, is it relevant to the intent of what we're trying to accomplish here? Like, I definitely said the PCP thing of, like, you generally want more praise than just scientifically it's going to reinforce the behavior more often, but you don't need, like, to measure out the ratio perfectly. If you're feeling more critical because we're struggling, that's fine, but it needs to be, again, correlated with what the intent of the game was, or what the scrimmage was. How do you know when the movement to move on is? Subjective satisfaction? Yeah. Or boredom. Yeah. I think a lot of people are like, well, how much better at the skill do we need to be before we move on? But the reality is that's the wrong question to ask, because maybe you guys improve dramatically and success breeds success. So the players are getting really good at communicating, and you just let them work on it for 3 or 4 weeks because we just keep getting better and better and better and better. Or maybe you do it for a week and a half. You get 3 or 4 scrim blocks and we're having a hard time and we just need to come back to it later, but they're getting bored. What's up, Akari? How are you, mate? Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about review. review, 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 review. So scrim is the practice, but review is the context with which we know what to practice. So that's important. Review basically is just deciding what we are practicing. Now, I kind of brought this one up earlier. One of the big moments for me is always like the turning point with where I start to delegate some of the review responsibilities. But I think especially earlier on, you're going to have a lot more of that responsibility yourself until player competence and agency is earned. Biggest thing with review is clarity. Biggest thing. Why? Because this is what helps this. If you do not have clarity with what we are intending to practice, then we do not know how to practice it correctly. Example of clarity would be guys who need to work on our support ults. That is not clarity. We need to work on making sure that we are pushing our staging correctly around our support ults. That's a lot more clarity. We'll talk about more examples later on. We need to make sure that we're communicating our off angles pre-fight. We need to make sure that our Soldier 76 on the flank is communicating more consistently. We need to make sure that we're doing a better job with listening to ult track and making decisions accordingly. We need to make sure that we're using X or Y cooldown and timing those cooldown pressures more consistently. We need to do a better job of when we do swap that we have a plan with that swap, or we're communicating our intent with that swap. That's clarity. And when you're reviewing these things, you actually need to prepare. So how do we get clarity? Prep, oration. Prepare. If you do not have an intent or a theme with your VOD review, you are failing. You are failing. If you have not, during the scrimmage, taken notes, gone, okay, wait, there's a pattern there. I'm noticing that, or okay, we keep doing this wrong. Okay, let me take a note here. And taking note of timestamps. And going into that team review the next day or whenever else with a short 10 to 20, 10 to 30, depending on the length of the review, a demonstration of what and why with opportunity for just team discussion and explanation of your intent, then you have failed your team. One of the worst things to do with the VOD review is to do what I call the buffet review, as I mentioned earlier, where you are going in and you're just looking at a map that went poorly and calling out 8 or 9 different random things that went wrong. And we need to do this better. We need to do this better. We need to do this better. Even if you were right, and every single one of those things is important and was done incorrectly, that is not something that is reasonably actionable. Now, there are some exceptions to this rule. One of the things that when you're doing individual review is that everyone might have a slightly different goal in that scrimmage. And so everyone's kind of working on their own thing. That's fine. But if that's the case, then we don't necessarily have a team goal. This is an individual mechanics or individual micro scrimmage map, right? But if there's a team goal, everybody needs to be on the same page exactly what needs to be practiced, and not every single error needs to be put under the microscope. You need cohesive and coherent examples of exactly what needs to be done better, preferably with communication. Because I think communication provides important context behind why that decision was being made. We need root cause analysis. Again, we go back to praise, correct praise. When you're doing VOD review, make sure that you're high on PCP. You need to be providing the same level of praise, correct praise, catching them. This is a good demonstration of what I'm wanting. Look at that. Do you see how good that looks? This is it done poorly. We need to do a better job of that. But here's it done well. Now, does that mean that you need more positive examples than good examples? No, but I do encourage you to do, if you're not going to do PCP, then do P, C, 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 P. So that the last thing I think about is when it was done well and how good that felt, right? But if there's more bad examples than good, that's fine. But catch them doing it good. If at all possible, okay? Finally, this is the end goal here. As soon as player competency, understanding, communication, leadership has leveled up, you can start to assign responsibility when it comes to reviews. Let me give you guys an example. We have talked about support ults last week. We have trained our support ults for 3 or 4 scrim blocks. I am going to take my tank player and my support player who's communicating these support ults. I'm going to say, hey, Joe Blow and Sally Ding Dong, you're going to prepare a 15. I want you to look at Hollywood, look at our support ults, and have a 10-minute presentation about how we use the support ults tomorrow. Go. That's it. Give them a specific correct direction of what they need to study, and then let them work together. And those players, because we've already coached and talked about our expectations for subordinates and why and where and how, and we've even had time to train them, they will have a very easy time spotting out the errors and the things that were done well. That's the end goal. That's the end goal. Now, does that mean that you offload all your reviews? No, I would say you don't even offload the majority of your reviews, especially if they're new concepts. That needs to be you teaching them most of the time. But as quickly as that competency is earned, offload the responsibility and supervise it. Oh, and by the way, when you're offloading that Hollywood review, make sure that you also watch the Hollywood review and take your own notes. Keep them accountable. Make sure that you agree with their takes. That's not really a good way to describe it. Don't make sure that they agree with their takes. Make sure that they've put the work in and have your own opinion and your own feedback to provide there. But don't just take that as a responsibility or an opportunity, to offload responsibility. So you want a theme. You need to prepare that theme. You need to deliver that theme with a cohesive vision. And then if you need to repeat that theme for an accountability review, you need to. The two types of reviews that I would say here really quick is I would say either there are teaching reviews and there's accountability reviews. And essentially what that means is that the support alt review might teach the concept that I want us to do, explain why, and give examples of good and bad. The accountability review is more along the lines of how are we doing? How are we doing? Are we doing this correctly? Like a realistic vision of us doing it. The best reviews, the most productive reviews are the ones where you taught the concept, you go back and you look at your team's performance during the scrimmage at that skill, and you go, oh my gosh, guys, look at how good we didn't have PCCCCP, we had PCCCC. Like 50%, 60% of fights, we're doing it correctly, guys. Massive improvement. Good job. Great work, everybody. Thumbs up, right? That's a thumb, right? And there's nothing more encouraging than that as a player, catching them in the act of doing it correctly, right? And that could be a review too. Not just critical, but this is great, guys. Let's keep up the momentum there. It can be very encouraging. Public praise, all that kind of stuff. It's also motivating to know that you've worked really, really hard at this in scrims, and it's showing. It's showing, right? But, okay, questions on reviews. The vast majority of reviews are going to be around this. Teaching a concept, explain the concept, why it matters, with a lot of preparation. For example, I would like to say that they need to be short. Like I'd say anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. But for every, let's say 15, 20 minute review, usually took like an hour of preparation for me, at least historically. That's where most of the work as a coach kind of goes into, I think. And then the way that you deliver it needs to be like a positive example, critical, and preferably ending on a positive example as well. Okay, questions. I know that was a lot there. What if it's a new concept? They just never do it right. It's just, do you review before or after in between scripts? Yeah. So all these more detail oriented questions, this is a good time. I would say before, because the intent of the review should be to handle goals, like to give feedback. I think post scrim review can be useful as an emotional decompression. So I used to do this back with Molfig after our matches, because he would always be very upset after our matches, right? Depending on the match, right? And we'd go through together, and he would always be in a much better mood afterwards, because it was oh, that was it? Oh, we could have done that. We could have done that. But that was less of a teaching moment and more of a therapeutic review. But if you're looking teach and set goals, you need something before scrimmage 90% of the time, which is why it's important you don't have an hour and a half long review. I knew a lot of players, dude, I remember so many teams that would be yeah, we review 2 or 3 hours a day. We watch all the VODs. Frick off, dude. You're not even fully locked in for even half of that time. Lazy preparation from your coaches. Your players are half zoned out. Congratulations. That's like saying I do an 8-hour arm workout. Frick off. Congratulations. It's oh yeah, I remember when I worked 50 hours a week, and I remember my first part-time job. Ha ha ha. Frick off, idiot. People want to brag about how much they suffer, and the reality is just lazy time management. So I think the shorter the review, the more sweet and intent, and the more sharp the practice, the better the team. The better the team. For VODs, you think it's worth it for people to watch recordings or for people to be present during them? We'll have to be present. Have to be present. Not have to be, that's kind of an exaggeration. But again, it depends on your level of expectation. If you have a team that's actually really serious and playing at a high level, you have to be present. Because remember, they need to be asking questions. You need to be asking them questions. There needs to be some sort of a conversation. Even when you're teaching, you really want to be asking questions. I know it's the whole the classroom meme of oh no, teacher's gonna ask you a question. But you have to be actively involved in that process. You can't just simply be a spectator here, right? Which is why I've been doing this throughout this entire seminar, if you guys haven't noticed. noticed, right? Every single topic, trying to engage with you guys at least a little bit here, because sitting here and listening to a seminar and just simply taking notes that you're not going to do anything with, that you're not really internalizing much of that. That's why I also reminded you guys that you should not expect yourself to download all this information to play. It's not reasonable. You're just not good enough. I'm sorry. I'm not good enough to do all this myself. So you should go, okay, what do you think is like a reasonable expectation for me? How can I engage with this emotionally, and what's reasonable for me to move on? But yeah, people's engagement and what they're doing is so incredibly important for them to like actually apply it, even if they technically understand what's going on. That's why it's also like that's why like that was like the biggest part. That was the biggest problem with me with London Spitfire the second season, was like being a remote freaking sucked. Remote coaching sucks, guys. That was my responsibility. I'm not blaming the responsibility on anybody else there, but like that there is just nothing. There's nothing like being in person. And obviously being in voice channel is like the closest you can get in a lot of the situations. If you do an accountability review and it's improved a lot, do you use the same review to teach something else because the thing you're working on stopped being? No, you hammer at it again until it's no longer interesting. Now you might mix it up, but if it's immediately improved on in like the first or second time, just be like, dude, guys, this is amazing. Let's do this one more time. You know, you gotta know like your players' like interest level, right? Like if they've literally solved it, sure, maybe, but I don't think there's anything wrong with like allowing players to continue to continue to work on a strength, you know. How often do you ask players questions as opposed to giving answers? Do you do in your VODs? Depends on the level of competency. Depends on the level of competency. A microcosm of this is the individual reviews that I do. Going back to that Gold Genji player. I'm yapping a lot early on. I'm asking questions early on for sure, and explaining why early on, sure. But the later and later we get in the review, the more and more questions I'm asking. I have an expectation that they understand what I'm talking about. And if I ask questions and they get the question wrong, then that means that I explained the question or the concept incorrectly, and we have to go back to scratch. Like, you need to be asking questions more and more into the review. For VOD one-on-one reviews, some players are hungry for one-on-ones or willing to VOD 3 hours a day. Is this a good sign that they need to reinforce something they need to avoid? Again, it kind of goes back to like the player expectations. Like, obviously 3 hours of VOD review a day is like really bad, like completely worthless. But you don't want to like completely deflate like that improvement, like that improvement thirst, you know. Let them go with it, but just temper it. Be like, hey, you know, you're more than willing to VOD as much as you can. I can definitely help you out, but just keep in mind that it's gonna be hard to kind of internalize that much information in a single day. So don't feel too bad if you're struggling to apply it all. I'll be happy to help you out. And just like they'll learn, but you can kind of be that voice of reason without necessarily deflating that balloon, you know? To like see if they've understand what you've already said. Yes, exactly. And to allow them to think for themselves too, right? Think back to that puppet example. Like I said, there's a lot of teams I've worked with that kind of memorize the rollouts, memorize the situations over and over again, right? And it's like Overwatch, especially in the 5v5 format, is a much more dynamic and complicated game, or fast-paced rather, so you need players that like really understand the game fundamentally and understand their heroes fundamentally and don't have like a flow chart that they follow. Teams that flow chart are like glass cannons. They'll perform really well under perfect circumstances, but if anything throws them off, they just completely crap the bed. What if they're just a bit dense? I mean, that's why we teach, right? I've worked with some really stupid players, like really stupid players, but you know, players will learn. They will improve. You set your level of expectations based off of what they can, one step ahead of where they are, you know? There's only so much to review without practicing, and only so much improvement to expect from a day of practice. That's it, exactly. Yes, Houdini, stupidest player I've ever worked with. 100%. No, actually, so stupid I don't even want to work with Houdini. Yep, that's the one. Okay, we'll finish off here. So last little bit here before we get into the demonstrations here. So once you have reached this point, you need to go back to left. You need to go back to left. Just ignore the text on my screen right now. You need to go back. You need to go back and reevaluate what's our level like, you know, so then therefore what's our expectation like? Okay, so then therefore what should the feedback be and what should our training look like? And you rinse and repeat. Now, the optimistic way of looking at this is thinking that, oh, we're always moving forward. We're always moving forward. We're always are progressing our level. But the reality is that stuff happens, you know? You lose players, you get worse players, the meta becomes worse for you, players leave, teams disband, and you got to kind of reevaluate your expectations. I mean, life happens, right? This is a personal thing too. So your level of expectations, the level of feedback, the level of training is constantly changing. So you need to constantly be evaluating your situation, being like, I'm always pushing the team one step higher than they are right now, but circumstances change, right? So you need to kind of take the attention and set reasonable expectations accordingly. A couple of notes I've got here. Delegate leadership responsibility according to competency. We talked about that. Keep in mind that people will tend to kind of coast in the background within teams, so you need to make sure that we're setting expectations for each individual player. Fight the trend of chasing trends. So it's very easy for players to get, oh, we need to learn this hero. We need to learn this hero. Oh, we need to learn this hero. You don't want to completely squash that innovation and willingness to try new things, but you need to fight the trend of like that we always chase the meta if that's inappropriate. And then on the converse side, on the opposite side, you need to avoid letting players be like, well, I don't ever want to experiment or try anything new. Players can get stuck in either permanently trying to play the new meta, always blaming the composition, or saying that the composition is never the problem, it's always down to the execution. The better teams are ones that are willing to innovate, but find that balance with playing to their strengths. Very important you play to your strengths. Goal is to teach yourself out of teaching. The goal is to coach yourself out of the teaching job temporarily, but always be willing to step back in based off of the team's management. And generally, if you are the most successful times that I've ever had as a coach, where I taught myself out of a job mostly, unless there was a significant meta shift or we had a significant weakness, and every player or coach on the organization or team knew exactly what was expected from them. The teams that I've had that have been the most shaky were when nobody really knew exactly what their responsibility or what their expectations were, whether that was with VOD review, ult tracking, or even assistant coaches. Like, I think with Sheer Cole, that was some of the best coaching that I've done because I had 2 assistant coaches that knew exactly what I needed from them, expectation-wise, and every player knew what their responsibility was during scrimmages and what responsibility was during practicing. Some of the teams that I've struggled with the most, both as a head coach and as an assistant coach, was where I wasn't really sure what my role or what my expectations were. But last thing I'll finish up before we do some team review demonstration is... I'm going to drop the link to the full team coaching seminar I did over at the University of Minnesota and chat. And then that goes in a little bit more detail with many of the concepts that I talked about. And crucially, doesn't use Microsoft Paint. And I look really short in that, but I promise you I'm 5'9". I promise you. There's a lot of tall people there, okay? Listen, I don't know what it is about that video. I just look short. I don't get it. I'll see you guys at BlizzCon. Anyone wants to talk trash, I'll mog you guys at BlizzCon. Okay. Any questions before we move on to the team review demonstration? Malevolence, if you want to have a couple of those codes prepped. We don't have to go right now, but we can go in a few minutes.
Yeah, sure. I have a New Junk City and a Runasapi to start.
Sure.
Which one do you prefer map-wise?
Doesn't matter to me. Both can work, yeah. Yeah, shout out to Naked for allowing us to post that publicly, because technically that was going to be gate kept behind a paywall, and I bargained with him. It's like, bro, you're a big collegiate org, but nobody freaking knows who you are outside the collegiate scene. So it's like, let me post it on my channel, and so they allowed me to post on the channel. So sadly, I will not be doing Naked seminars in the future because it travels too much. Maybe we'll do it again. It was actually a lot of fun. Like, it was actually such a blast. I love yapping in person, so maybe we'll do it again. Arms, what the frick? How did you find that? What is that from? Okay. Let's get this pulled up here. So I'm gonna kind of give you guys not necessarily a demo of a team review, because it's going to be a little artificial and cornball. But Screenshot of my desktop. I'm gonna give you guys kind of an example of what I would be looking for in preparing for a review, not necessarily a delivery, because the delivery is explaining the concepts, answering questions. We could do that, but I think it's gonna be a better demonstration, a more important thing of how to prepare for a team review. Now, keeping in mind, I have absolutely no idea like what the purpose of this review should be, but I think that's kind of a better demonstration because you're not always gonna have a perfect idea of what you need to do. Let's get this pulled up here. Now, what level is this? Malevolence? Like what rank approximately?
This is Master Division,
Okay.
and face it's like the tier 2-ish.
Tier 2-ish, okay. And is there a particular team we should be looking at here?
Yes, our team is red. That's
Gotcha.
normal.
Okay, team red. Okay. So let me kind of give you guys just a couple of key things to look at just from the get-go. We'll go with 3 different concepts. One would be ultimate layering. Okay, so like our push-pull, like how we're managing, essentially like how we're managing our ultimate fights. Okay. The second one would be how are we managing our off angles, like how are we managing our splits, depending on the ult situation, right? The third one could be something as simple as timing, like are we synchronizing our pressure off of that? And crucially, we don't have communication for this, but this is where if you're going to be doing something like timing or communication or coordination, you would want to be using a recording of an overhead from a coach. And sure, we'll do a fourth one. The fourth one would be more along the lines of like how we're utilizing our micro. So the reviews where maybe you get a little bit more granular would be something along the lines of like, hey, are we misusing our Reaper Wraith? Are we misusing our amplifier? Are we misusing, especially for a new character, are we misusing our bike, right? Anything along those lines, you could kind of have like a popcorn review where everybody has one specific goal that you focus on for them and move on from there. But you could pretty much just go into these matchups and like right from the get-go, right? So we're just looking at Team Red right now. The first thing that we can look at here is, do we like this split? Right? Does this split make a lot of sense with what we're doing? I'm streaming, right? Okay, good. I'm streaming, just making sure. So like, given the context of like what we're doing, do we feel like we execute this split correctly? All right. Does this make a lot of sense in a neutral, right? If the answer is yes, then we're cooking. Okay, great. Okay, so then what about the ult cycle? Well, obviously that's irrelevant. Okay, what about the timing? What about the micro? What do you guys think of this? Is this what we wanted from a bubble on Reaper? Well, it looks like my Reaper was reloading during the first little bit of the bubble and didn't get a lot of shots out of it. Okay, then do we want to use bubble that way, right? So we've already got a couple of things that we can talk about here. First off is, how do we feel about our splits when we've lost our push-pull with our Lucio? Second off, how do we use our bubbles correctly and timing coordinate that correctly? And then now you've got something to look for moving forward. So what we could do for the rest of this match as a coach is I could literally only look at our bubble usage and our bubble communication, only look at our splits, or only look at the micro of how our supports are positioned. So I have no idea what we're looking at right now, but the first thing that stands out to me right now is that I'm not super confident with how we're using our bubbles. Like, there's just not enough push off of that bubble, so there's not enough resources being forced off of that bubble. And then, yeah, we could have bubbled that, sure, but then, well, actually, wait a second. Where did our other bubble go? We bubbled ourselves. Yeah, see, that was not a good bubble. So we've got basically 2 questionable bubbles right now. But that's an individual error, maybe a communicational error. The other question here is, if we've got a split here, how do we want to position and play when we have a deep split like this? Because when you have a Lucio on a split off angle, you obviously are losing your ability to push-pull. So then how does the rest of the team play and take angles around that? Right? Now, I'm not really answering these questions right now. This is not a macro coaching session. But essentially what I've already done is I've kind of raised a couple of red flags. How our split plays, how main plays when we're split with a Lucio, and how we're utilizing our bubbles. Okay, so right now, maybe some of you guys have kind of diagnosed what you think is the biggest problem with how we executed that. I'm not going to tell you what I think. It doesn't matter what I think. What matters is that I'm looking for a theme. This is tedious. This is boring. Put on some music. Relax. Think about it. Okay, let's look at this again. By the way, this is what you're doing by yourself, alone, 10:30 at night. You know what I'm saying? Okay, what about that bubble? Okay, we're going to take a solo split. How do we play when we take a solo split? Should we have taken that, committed to that solo split? If so, how would we take that? How do we time that? Okay. Do we want to retake through here? Is there a better retake path? How should we use bubbles here? Do we just forfeit the splits entirely? Do we rotate and then split late? Should my Lucio play with Main or should my Lucio push with Xion here? What about this bubble? Should we have bubbled a Reaper there instead? Because my Reaper had teleport. And, did we ult track this Kitsu? Okay. You guys noticing any patterns just yet? And it's only going to get saucier once we get our ultimates online. Let's keep going. I really challenge you for the next, like, let's say 10 to 15 minutes of this team review demonstration. I really challenge you guys to, like, if you're a coach, lock the frick in. Lock in right now and really think about this. Like, I'm going to ask some questions. I want you to find your narrative here. What's your low-hanging fruit? What do you think this team needs to work on the most, given this review? Okay, look at our splits. What about this Kitsu? What about our staging? What about our ult tracking into beat? Are we too close? Should we have a better split? Is beat weak enough to where you could do this now? What about our bubbles going into this? Let's look at our bubbles going into this. What about my Xion's positioning right now? Why is my Xion positioned like this right now? Why isn't she on the angle? I'm not saying it's a crit. I'm not saying it's a mistake. I'm saying there might be a reason behind that, right? What do you guys see? Now, at this point in time, you know, all chaos is loose, right? So we're just blowing buttons right now. But you really, really, really want to make sure that when we have control of how we're playing and how we're positioning without the chaos of a mechanical devolve fight, that we're putting ourselves in the best position possible. Okay, we'll keep going. Given our ult tracking here, how should we, A, position, and B, how should we layer? Does this have any impact on the micro of how we use our Suzu, how we angle with our Xion, and how we utilize our bubble and amp? What do you guys see? What do you guys see? Okay, what do you guys think? Let's actually pause right now. I don't want us to sit here and just ask to the wind. What do you guys think? Without developing a concrete narrative right now, in the chat here, in the event stage chat here, what are some things that are standing out to you really quick? I'm gonna actually read chat real fast. What are some things that we want to keep an eye on? Again, don't develop a narrative just yet, but are you seeing any patterns so far? I'll give you guys my 2 cents in a second, but I'm going to see what you guys say. The issues seem to be communication and timing. If there's a call for ults and a call and engages, is there a talk of I will rush there? Anything, is there a call for the ult? Okay. Early bubbles and timing and off angling. Okay. I'm going to challenge you guys a little bit better. What do you mean early bubbles? What needs to be done differently? Why do you think the early bubbles are happening here? Why is the timing off? Or is there a pattern yet? This is freaking hard work, man. Sorry bubble usage being early, but why? Why do you think that's... Now, obviously, you guys may not actually know the reason why you don't really hit the communication, so these are just going to be, like, at best, an educated guess. Yeah, a lot of our... the biggest thing that I have seen so far in terms of timing is the Reaper Zarya communication and timing is really not good. It's not good at all. It's not just bad when they're next to each other. There's a lot of situations where we're bubbling too late or we're not bubbling at all, or we bubble and he's not pushing. But also a lot of the responsibility goes to our Reaper here too. Because if the Reaper is taking this angle right now, my Reaper needs to stop freaking giving himself away. The whole point is that we need to stage and not get our CDs forced early. So right now, this is a team that doesn't look like they have enough experience playing Reaper Zarya specifically. There's a lot of random buttons being used right now, not just from a mechanical level, but there needs to be more of a do nothing, do a lot. Do nothing, do a lot. Do nothing, do a lot. Basically, that's one of the big ones that I'm seeing. And that's leading to the Zarya not really knowing how she wants to use her bubbles. I'm not sure if you guys would agree. I feel like the Zarya should be playing more for hits with Xion for Reaper than bubbling herself. Right, but the reason, a lot of times when you see, like, this bubble is just kind of math, I'm not going to lie to you guys. But the reason why we're seeing a lot of Zarya bubbles, I think, is due to a lack of cohesion or leadership with the Reaper specifically. Right. Okay, we'll keep watching. Like, for example, here, what was the fight plan? What was the fight plan? Bubble trade with the Reaper, then grab mid-fight? I mean, it's a pretty good... You don't need a complicated ult plan here. But if our fight plan was to have a Reaper angle unsupported, then the Reaper needs to stop giving himself away. He doesn't have pocket, right? So I'm looking at this not necessarily from, oh, more off angles, more off angles, more off angles, although, you know me, I'm always going to love some off angles. I'm looking at this from a perspective of, like, our entire push-pull with our Reaper cycles, our Reaper turns, like the Koreans like to say, is not very good. Not near good enough, right? And now, whose fault is that? I don't know. I have no idea. That's you're gonna need communication. You're gonna need to know the team environment to understand exactly that's the issue. And that needs to be a conversation. That needs to be a conversation that we have here. What's the layer here? I mean, even here you guys can see it, right? Look. Right? That bubble's too late. So that's not enough damage off of that bubbled Reaper. Now, in terms of our angle split approach, what else are you guys seeing here? What do you guys think? Okay, we'll move on. That one I'm gonna leave unanswered. I'm gonna leave that one unanswered. Let's go in this last fight here. What do you guys think? What do you guys think? I mean, this is a real question of whether this play makes any sense, given the fact that we know that we're playing into Kitsu, right? So this is a completely different concept that we could talk about, right? Look at our ult charge right now. Look at our ult charge right now. What should we be doing? What should we be doing with our ult charge? Look at it. Why are we 80% on Kitsu taking this engagement? Right? Low-hanging fruit. We need to win one fight, we cap this point. Why are we taking this engagement before we have Kitsu? And if our plan is to kind of bait and kite, then why are we bubble TPing where our Reaper's fricked if we disengage? Right. If that's the play, then Xion can take a solo angle, play patiently and ratty. We need Lucio in main to disengage the ultimate until we build Kitsu. And we probably need Lucio sitting on speed aura until we get that Kitsu. Saving both bubbles. That forces them either to force a bad Kitsu, or we can take the Kitsu mirror matchup when we have our own, and then we can layer additionally on top of that with Death Blossom mid-fight. Right? So now what's our problem? Is this a bad communicated Reaper engage? Not really. I mean, maybe it's a little early with the bubble, but it's not terrible, right? So the problem here is just bad fight planning around the ult. So you're noticing here, you can already see it. This is a buffet, right? This is a buffet. Should my Xion be a deeper flank? Maybe not. I don't know. Should we be communicating with the bubbles better? Yeah. Should we be playing around our support ults more patiently? Probably, right? So this is where your job as a coach is to prioritize. Which one do you think demands our attention sooner rather than later? Right? Which one is the priority? And in terms of how to make that decision, there's two factors. One is importance. The second one is ease. How easy is it to do X? How important is it to do X? Like, communication with Zarya and Reaper is very important, but it's also very difficult. To simply not engage until we have Kitsu is pretty important and also very easy. But also, that's not been something that we've seen every fight. It's just happened occasionally. Once, maybe twice. We'll keep watching, obviously. But that's kind of like, that's the challenge. That's the challenge. Which one's the priority? We'll move on. Actually, this might be a good time to move on to a different one entirely. Let's look at a different composition. Malevolence, do you have a different is there a different composition being played on the other map as well? Do you know?
I don't remember off the top
That's
of my
fine.
head.
Rip it. Just send it my way. We'll move ahead. I'll watch one more fight here too. Okay, let's take a look at this code here. But you guys kind of see what I'm saying? Like, this is, the preparation is the hardest work. What we're doing right now is by far the hardest part of your job. By far the hardest part of your job. Okay. All right. Compositional shenanigans aside, find the patterns. Find the patterns so nobody else can. What do you guys see? What do you guys see? I already see something right away. Yeah, I agree. We needed a deep, especially when we're not playing for push-pull, we need an angle with our Xion way sooner. This gives me the willies right here. Now, who wants to angle there? That's up to y'all. Y'all make that decision here. But if we're not playing for push-pull, there's zero reason for double support stack when we have a wide open lane on left side. This is why we lose so much space early, is because EXO is not allowed to play as aggressive as we possibly can, right? Now, we do eventually set up that split, so kudos for recognizing it. Well done. And we played patiently, too. Good job. We go for a hard commit. Hard commit is a little risky, but we do have our angles established, and we end up getting the trade. Okay. And again, we could look carefully at like our timing of the Reaper press, how we're using our cardiac, how we're using our Suzu, and so on too. Let's see. What do you guys think? What do you guys think? Maybe not a lot of layering to talk about right now. Mostly just cooldown usage and map control. Looks a little better. I will say, based off of the last fight, one consistent thing I'm seeing is Brad needs to sit the frick down and shut the frick up. Brad's got this elite little off angle here and dire triggers for a whopping 3 damage. Brad, roleplay Dracula, my friend, because you completely ruined the element of surprise off of this lane right now. But in terms beyond that, without looking too much more into the micro here, this is beautiful. This is really well done. The difference here, actually, you can see, is that the enemy supports stack. Cass goes to clear the lane by himself, and so the Mizuki just being here is like, that's the difference right here, right? That's the difference. Just that little bit of heal value, heal aura value, get the trade. Nice job. I would like a little bit more proactivity here. Maybe if you guys want to push your advantage here. What's the fraud here? Who's the fraud here? I think this is definitely a situation where we could try to set up a Kiriko with a Reaper to play it patiently up top, right? Maybe if possible. And so that we could deepen our angle control on top. Certainly once we get a spawn advantage here. Alright, let's keep going. So in these situations, you guys are noticing when there's not as much of a Lucio disengage, and we can't get rushed upon as quickly, then doing setups like this matters a lot more, right? Here's a question for you guys. Do I like Mizuki up here, or do I like Kiriko up here? I guess, do you like it? I don't think there's a clear answer here. Does the ultimate situation change your decision there? These okay. Why? First off, why is Cassidy walking in here like a 2v1, 3v1? And why are neither of these supports like doing anything other than double pocketing their Orisa? I swear I'm watching a plat game. I swear support players are so freaking boosted, dude. They're just literally the worst people in the history of the universe. But that being said, y'all are popping off right now. Y'all setup is like just, it's actually insane how much better you guys are playing this right now. Actually insane how much better you guys are playing this right now. Now, does Mizuki ult change who you want on main? Oh, freaking Brad. Brad! Freaking Brad! Right? Freaking brag. DPS players are literally the worst players at the... they're just so bad at the game. So bad at the game. Major ego problems, too. Freaking Brad. I freaking hate DPS players so much with a burning passion. What do you guys think of this? This is actually interesting. Was this communicated though? And by that I mean you guys holding space here, right? I don't think it's a bad decision. Oh my days. Layers upon layers upon layers. I'm going to cut you guys a little bit of slack here. Freaking Brad. I love Brad. I think Brad is the best player I have ever seen. I freaking love Brad. Brad is the best. Brad is the epitome of DPS players. Just absolute GOAT. Now, the reason why I kind of skipped over this is you're probably wondering, like, why are we not talking about this fight more? Chaos, mid-fight comms. Did we have mid-fight leadership here? Could it have been done better? Maybe. But I'm generally a little bit easier on chaotic fights where macro kind of goes out the window and we just press buttons. That's okay. The thing that you guys did well in your macro here was you had a fighting withdrawal. Do you see this? You guys were down one, so you gave space, but you didn't give up the entire map, right? So this right here, this is what you can control, a fighting withdrawal before Brad gets back. So from my perspective here, the Kitsu is like, I mean, again, what did I say about support players? You know what I'm saying?
Let the Kitsune guide you.
Are you freaking kidding me, right? Doesn't even hit your Mauga. For just the worst person I know in the history of the universe. But to be honest with you, I actually think the idea of the Kitsu is totally fine. You're holding space, 4v5, holding an off angle. This in theory is okay. And this forces a response from them too. So I actually don't hate the idea behind what's being done when you guys were calm. Everything from here on out is just total chaos. Everything goes out the window. So even if you were to like lose this fight here, you could look at this fight and be like, hey, they blew literally 3 ultimates. That's okay. So for you as a coach, you want to focus on situations when your players had a time to actually make strategic decisions. That's because that's what you can control. That's what you can improve. Yeah, the placement of the Kitsu is like sus as all get out. I don't think the idea was bad though. All right. What's the plan? What's the plan? What's the plan? Do we have a plan here with how we're going to retake this space? This looks like a plan to me. This looks like a plan to me. I don't mind this plan. The plan was we don't want to fight there at all. And we don't have the layering for it. That's a good plan. I like that plan. It's not the only plan available there. You could fight there if you wanted to, but it's difficult. That's a good plan. That's good team play right there. You want to talk about a VOD review? When you're criticizing how we're taking and controlling space or our timing with things, don't forget the PCP, right? That's a freaking P right there. That's a P right there. And honestly, the fight before was pretty P too, right? I need to find a different word. But yeah, this is good. That was good. That was communicated. You could tell, and it was also acted on. So whoever called that and followed up on that needs a big gold star. Nice job. Well done. Brad, I swear, Brad. Frickin' Brad. I think that my criticism here would be more along the lines of I think maybe Reaper needs to find a different angle here. Maybe Reaper needs to play this angle. Because we need to play the line here instead. But because it's difficult for Brad to do anything from here, right? Like the space sucks. But it's more of a nitpick. The idea is there. This is just something that you guys need to experiment with more. Disengaging the wall is really good. We're still holding space, and now they're walking into us. Brad teleports out. Brad gets freaking picked off. I mean, this would be more of a micro thing, you know, really. And frankly, it's kind of unlucky. Like that's one Wraith form away from being like completely fine. And then that's both, you know, we've completely disengaged an ultimate, and this is still winnable. And then all of a sudden we can get full pocket off of that. And my Reaper's focusing these guys so they can't focus the Shigandan. So this is where like you need to kind of choose your battles here. This could have been played 100% better, but I think the big thing was like where Brad set up and maybe a couple other tiny details there. But I don't think that was really bad from anybody. And then playing for the trade here seems also pretty reasonable. Yeah, this seems pretty reasonable. Okay, this fight up here is important. We'll finish off with maybe this right here. But again, this is what I'm doing right now is not how I would. This is so important. What I'm doing right now is not how I would conduct a team review. You understand? Like we're just chatting. You know, this is how I would conduct a team review when me and my assistant coach are after scrims are screwing around, right? Drinking tea and just like trying to figure out what we're going to talk about tomorrow. This is not how I would conduct a team review. This is casual. This is taking notes. This is preparation phase. This is thorough. We're looking at little details. We're looking for theories. We're looking for themes. You know what I'm saying? This is a Brad roasting session. That's right. This is a session telling you how bad Brad is and how terrible support players are. I hate this. I hate this. My eyes are burning. What's the mistake? What's the mistake? Does this look familiar? $100, $100 million to the person that spots the mistake here. Support stack? Yeah, to a lesser extent. Yeah, to a lesser extent. We would like to flip it. For sure. Yeah, exactly. It's Kitsu. It's Kitsu. And the only reason why I'm being kind of a nut about it is because we will have plenty of time to steal this robot. Like, we have seconds here. We need Kitsu. And yes, we need a support angle later for 100%. 100%. Like, even it's even worth a TP here early on, 100%. The reason why I say that is this is not the first time that we've seen us taking an aggressive engagement 95% on Kitsu. The flip map idea is great, but there's a communicational problem with how this team takes space around the support ults. Right? Is this a consistent problem? I don't know. I've only watched a map total, 2 halves of a map, not even, right? But that is a red flag. Because that is a map losing or fight losing mistake right there from the team. Map losing mistake or fight losing mistake, sorry. Because that Orisa absolutely explodes if we have Kitsu before when we flip them out there. Absolutely explodes. Because the map flip might still work. Like, if it doesn't work, it almost works. Because the idea is good. The timing is not. Stop taking engagements 90% on ultimates. Please. Right? Now, there could be other micro misplays here that we're missing too, but yeah, we'll stop with that. So from the tiny little bit here, we could do a little baby review where I would talk about, hey, we need to work on Zarya Reaper communication, and Mookie, you need to do a better job saying, hey guys, I'm 85% on Kitsu, please wait. And that could be it. That could be the theme of the review: is better Zarya Reaper communication, Mookie doing a better job communicating their timing with Kitsu. And then a lot of praise about when it's communicated well, like the one Kitsu that we saw that seemed like it was done pretty well. The map control, the support's looking pretty good. Yeah. And we removed dire triggers from Brad. Exactly. But yeah, you could see, like, just even, like, I don't know, y'all. I don't know the communication. I don't know the team dynamic, you know? And we missed, I'm sure, a lot of details here too. But there were plenty of, like, little things that we can hammer away on, little narratives that we can run on. I mean, that's a lot of little things that we could practice right there, both from an individual perspective and from a team perspective. There was lots of good things that we can emphasize off of more. I think y'all were way better at your off-angle setups and those splits. Like, you guys made the enemy team look like pikers. But in terms of, like, the critical things, yeah, we can improve that too. We can kill that too. Yeah, Suzu's easier when you split too. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that's how you conduct a team review. Or sorry, how you prepare a team review, right? Is you study, you prepare, you take notes, and the more that you work with teams, the more you're going to notice those tendencies. And also, this is what you should be doing during scrims. Like, I think PCP and scrims is great, like providing feedback, but you can kind of like you could do scrim or review prep while you're scrimming. You can do review prep while you're scrimming, so you can, like, kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So that's why you should be locked in during scrims as a coach instead of just, like, smoking a blunt and, like, relaxing. Like, you need to be, like, locked in, preparing for the future review. Save yourself some time, you know. But yeah, okay. Questions. I must go in like 5-10 minutes, so we're only gonna be able to take a few of them. I have to. Oh, never mind. I'm not gonna say another really, really bad drug joke. These are not getting funny anymore. No, I'm not reading any more harms messages. That's the rule. If you notice these things during scrims, do not mention them really till a review after try to start correcting. Well, okay, so if you if you have a purpose in your scrim, which you should, then if it's not relevant to the purpose in the scrim, then you take note of them and you don't really bring them up. As long as that player is working on what they're supposed to be working on. Like if we're talking about setting up our off angles and I start yapping about how like we need to start like communicating our support ults better, then that's the danger of that is like we start to kind of like dilute our practice quality, right? So yeah, I would avoid it. I would avoid bringing it up in the moment. Yes, I would avoid bringing it up. How do you know what the most important thing for your team to focus on is? That's just coaching. That's just coaching, practice. How do I know that not waiting for a support ult is really, really important? Well, because I've watched a lot of fights with support ults and I've watched a lot of fights without support ults. And I say, my goodness, when we have a support ult, we win many, many things. And when we don't have support ult, we lose many things. So maybe if we wait 5 seconds, that'd be good for fight result, you know? When I watch Brad using dire triggers before the fight 7 times in a row and struggling to get value every single time and giving himself away every single time, is that going to win every single fight? No, but I see it every freaking fight. So it's like, well, okay, that's just experience. I got it! But yeah, like Hikari says, frequency and importance, right? Frequency and volume. Like if it's a really bad mistake, but it happens only like once or twice a map, it still probably needs to be addressed. If it's not a very important mistake, but it's happening every fight, it probably needs to be addressed. You know? It's like finding that mathematical balance. Okay, any other questions here? The Brad is in audience, by the way. Yeah, I know. Why do you think I've been flaming Brad so much? Listen. If I'm gonna, I only flame when people are listening. If people aren't here, there's no point calling them names. You know, I want emotional damage here. I want trauma. If we're not instilling trauma on our students, what are we really doing? It seems the most recurring subject mentioned this summer was expectations. Would you agree this is the most important thing to get down for teams? Practice quality and expectations. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, are your goals, is your training aligned with your expectations? You know, if a team is new, what is the role that needs the most attention for others to understand to play with them? I don't think there is an answer there. I think there is an answer there. I think there is a good answer to that one. Depends on the team. How long should you spend on issues mid-scrim to not overdo how much I'm yapping? I mean, really, feedback when it's related to the goal going into the scrim should be pretty short because you've already had the review leading up to it. So maybe you can iterate and be like, okay, yeah, so we need to make sure we're doing this. But if it's correlated or related to what you spent 20, 30 minutes talking about before the scrim, you probably don't have to spend hours and hours elaborating. You know, it's pretty simple. And if it's something that's kind of hard to demonstrate without like a visual example, then maybe you just need to not bring it up. How do you navigate giving feedback between maps while also focusing on the next maps? Well, only give feedback if it's correlated to what you can do better in the next map. Otherwise, move on. On the Sig Mizuki May comp, should you have a Juno or Kiri? Depends on the map, depends on the matchup. What? I think a lot of maps where a lot of speed could be useful. Juno could be useful, relatively useful. But if you're playing like that on like Escort or Hybrid, probably Kiri. But it depends. It depends on the map. Like there's maps like Circuit Royale. Like I'm kind of out of the loop when it comes to pro meta, to be honest with you as well. But I could see like Juno being useful in like Circuit Attack where like push pull is really strong. But if you're playing it on like, I don't freaking know. What words are hard? I'm trying to think of a good Escort or Hybrid map. Like, I don't know. Maybe playing on like freaking Blizzard World. You probably want a Kiriko there. But it really depends. What's an example of how you would try to get something practice, like the bubble issue, for example? You guys focus on competing every time you want to go in. Well, that's where you just have to sit down and talk with them. You know, like some of those issues are not super easy, but like you could bring into the line. It's like, okay, I've coached Reaper Zarya before. Generally, the Reaper calls the bubbles or the Zarya calls the bubbles. Whatever. You guys figure out a system, talk with the players, explain why it's important, and then figure out a system with them. So if it involves 2 players, especially if it involves communication, it might actually be better for you to sit down and have a conversation with both of them at the same time instead of giving them a strict guideline of what you want them to do. Help them to come up with a solution. Like you've identified that the communication between those 2 players is the problem, and so allow them to kind of come up with a solution, and you can kind of mediate that conversation. Midtown defense, yeah, that was probably where the Kiri would be good. Do you generally have couches record scrims for comms? Yeah, I think communication is really important for reviews. I think so. Because a lot of times you get to like root cause analysis, because a lot of times players will be like, oh, well, I did that because so-and-so called this. And it's like, you need to like have the context of what's being said, so you need to have like the timestamps from the VODs so you can immediately pull it up. You can bring issues up mid-scrim and have them focus on the issue in the next map. You can. Yeah, you can. You don't have to have something to work on for the entire match necessarily. Entire scrimmage. You can mix it up. I'm kind of demonstrating like a pretty simple way of looking at it, where you have one goal for the entire scrim block, but that's a pretty unnuanced approach, and there's definitely some variety in there. And I would be lying to you guys if most scrims that I've worked with had maybe 1 or 2 goals depending on the map or the composition. Especially if you guys play different comps, depending on the map, you guys might have different goals depending on the comp. I get my players doing ranked together to try and learn communication together. This is a good idea. This syndrome. I don't think it necessarily hurts them, but I think playing ranked with somebody is kind of overrated. It's like people also overrate like time played with people. Like, oh, they need time to work on their synergy. I mean, that's technically true, but like if you're just playing like ranked together, like let's be honest, like how often are you like really coordinating and communicating in ranked, right? It's more like it's more along the lines of like you're spending time with a person and you're enjoying spending time with them less so than anything else strategically. All right, last question, and then I must go. I always coordinate. Rank get serious. Yeah. For a low-level team with many fundamental mistakes like bad positioning, setup, and ult abilities to win a fight, which should be prioritized? Should be prioritizing both of them or one at a time? Probably one at a time to just mix it up. I mean, it's the same thing. How do you coach a bronze player? You teach them an off angle. You teach them how to control their crosshair, right? You teach them how to use their CDs. Like there is no hi Kitty. There's no like you could definitely look at each team and be like, okay, this team is definitely atrocious at off angling, but like low level teams will be kind of atrocious at everything. So for you, it's like you just kind of choose something and explain it and let them work with it and move on. I think that there's definitely like low ranked players which have strengths and weaknesses, but you don't have to necessarily nail the most important thing. You just need to be there consistently. Okay. Thank you guys for being here. Obviously a lot of things we talked about, all of which could be elaborated on much more. Key thing, the final thing I would say here is like be really, really intentional as a coach with what your goals are. In the same way that you coach your players, you need to be like, well, I need to do a better job with preparing for my team reviews. I need to do a better job communicating my expectations. I need a better job having a compositional philosophy. I need to do a better job listening to my players. I need to do a better job with working on my understanding of the game. I need to do a better job communicating clearly. I need to do a better job delegating responsibility. There's so many things that you can work on that we talked about, but the key thing is to set those goals, set yourself to the same level of expectations that you do for your players and progressing from there. And ultimately, like nobody is immediately a perfect leader, a perfect coach. I certainly am not, and I've never met anybody who is. So progress at it, be patient at it, work at it. It's a life skill. It takes a lot of time. It is not easy. And yeah, that is all. Loves and kisses, guys. Shout out to Elemental. Love you guys. I will see you guys later. Spilo out. Have a good rest of your day.